When we think of Britain before the Romans, we conjure images of primitive Celtic tribes fighting over territory, a distant land at the edge of the map, yet to be truly discovered by the advanced civilizations of the Iron Age. But what was it really like? I think it's time we delved into the British Isles in a time before the Romans invaded. But first, we've got to go back, way back, because Britain didn't suddenly spring into existence when the Romans arrived. No, people had been living here for thousands of years. So, let's get stuck in. Obviously not too far back. I think we can skip beavers and wildcats and move on to when humans arrived. Britain has a long and rich history. A long and often turbulent chain of events that form the chronology of this region. And if I was going to start way back with the first settlers, I wouldn't even know where to truly begin, as various hominids came and went with the ice age that waxed and waned. Thankfully though, this is a history channel and not an anthropology channel. As Stone Age hunter-gatherers are not our focus. So history, not prehistory, is where we'll begin our journey. Written records. Though, we'll be starting much later in the world's timeline, as even though other cultures like Egypt and Mesopotamia have written records, or since around 3,500 years BC, this wasn't the case over here on the small group of islands that we know today as Britain. So, because these people left behind no written record, all we know about them comes from other cultures, like the Greeks and the Romans. Ancient scholars whose writings are often supported, and at times contradicted, by people such as archaeologists, geologists, and metal detectorists, each playing a vital role in piecing together what can be best seen as two incomplete jigsaw puzzles, each with only a quarter of the pieces remaining, and covered in dust because they've been stored in an attic with the lid off. Experts have to sift through the evidence and do the best they can with what they've got. It is an ever-changing science that evolves with each new find. What we do know is that various tribes had been here for millennia. Neolithic burial mounds such as Lugby Longbarrow and stone circles we see at places like Stonehenge or Swinside, and they can be found all over Britain. Many hill forts dotted the landscape along with the distinctive round houses. These were no primitive cavemen. There was a thriving community of people connected by a culture. They had their own religion, style and customs, separated into the many tribes that blended their way up and down the region. Everything we know about these people comes from the many archaeological excavations that have been conducted over the years. They had a vast farming culture that spanned the British Isles. This required mass deforestation as they cleared the land and advanced their culture. Mysterious to our eyes, and with alien customs to our own. We know so little about them. There is only so much that science can teach us about these people as they transitioned to what we know as the Bronze Age. Thousands of years to us pass at the blink of an eye. This vast period in time would eventually be replaced by the culture of the Bell Beaker people, so called because of the pottery they left behind. Much like everything else, the Bell Beaker phenomenon is a mystery, and these distinct burial sites start cropping up all over Europe. It was quite the trend. And even though it doesn't last very long in mainland Europe, it lasts for centuries in the British Isles. Then, up in Yorkshire, you have the ferryby boats. These coast-hugging vessels are actually the oldest plank-built boats in Europe. These people are no stranger to travelling, which means their culture is connected on a much larger scale than before. Aside from their own achievements, they added to existing monuments like Stonehenge. The Bell Beaker people would have had local customs, religion, law, names, everything. Though we do not know what these customs were, all these names, all this religion. I mean, already archaeology is telling us volumes, but unfortunately, these volumes are still only a few more pieces of a puzzle I explained earlier. We're still lacking any written record. As time would press on, eventually the Celts would replace the Beaker people as the dominant culture. And during the Bronze Age, these trends continued to evolve. Monuments like Stonehenge go through another transformation, becoming the sites we know today. Places like Swinside are just as popular during this era as they were in the Neolithic. Even during the Bronze Age, these sites were ancient, well over 1,000 years old or more. The Celts would have found the original purpose of these stones just as mysterious as we do today. And others, like Bryn Cadafanna, are new to this period. A lot is going on during the Bronze Age. Much like poring over fossils of one creature and seeing how it slowly changes over the course of time, the same is happening here. It's an ongoing thing. Slow developments in things like agriculture and trade are giving this part of the world a recognisable look. We are seeing swords as far up as Scotland, suggesting a much more evolved form of warfare. As for their society though, we can only imagine what it looked like, as they didn't have a system of writing that we know of. So we have no way of knowing the ins and outs of this culture. Instead, we have to rely on the records of others. Which leads us to the Iron Age. But it wasn't the Romans who got here first. It was actually the Greeks. And we first hear of this land, then called Albion, as far back as the 4th century BC. In ancient Greek records, it seems to have originally been the name of a Spanish tribe, but shifted to the British Isles, and there may have been early records that we don't know of. But here, in 4th century Europe, scholars had heard of the region called Albion. The Greek explorer, Pytheas, made his voyage to Britain in around the 325 BC, and he described what he saw. He also uses the earlier term of Britannia, but Albion is the one that is primarily used at this point in time. Because the Greeks understood that the world was a globe and they were seeking new trade routes. And Pytheas notes that the Celts there had a thriving tin trade. They had drinks made from crops and honey, basically beer and mead. In the Mediterranean, they'd thrash the crop in the open air, but the Celts did it indoors, in barns, shielding it from the weather. An exotic barbarian culture from the ancient Greek perspective. Outside of archaeology, very little is known. We don't know about the names of the tribes that called these lands home. We know nothing of the names of the people that lived there. Well, saying that, we do know of a place called Valerian. And these people were familiar with foreign merchants. It was a place where tin was mined and melted into small ingots, which were then taken to a place called Ictis. but we don't know if these were the native names or names that Pythias attributed to them. I mean, sure, they are familiar with foreign merchants, but he's all the way from Massalia. It's a Greek colony south of Gaul. He's Mediterranean. But unfortunately, none of his works actually survive. We can only read Pythias through third-party sources, and he often draws skepticism from the likes of scholars like Strabo, who thought he'd fabricated the whole journey. He calls him a liar. He accuses Pythias of being vague at best. In his defence, Pythias was an explorer, not a scholar on Celtic Britain. He's not going on time team anytime soon. So I think old Strabo was being a bit disingenuous at the time. I think we can forgive Pythias for being a little bit vague. And he came from a culture not shy of the sea. Pythias, that is, not Strabo. In an age where ships still hugged the shore. Crossing the channel was quite the task, and only taken by a few. Even most Gauls were unaware of the Albion, right up until when the Romans would arrive later. It would be the traders and the sailors who would have the most contact with each other. Gallic tribes like the Veneti. And the Veneti boats would have been a far cry from those ferriby boats of the Bronze Age. These were sturdy oak affairs with large leather or hide sails. They had anchors fastened by chains. They were also flat-bottomed to exploit the tide, and good to beach when storms erupted, which was frequent over the channel that separated Britain from Gaul. We've advanced a tech level. So by using the accounts of others, we're already painting a more richer picture, adding to the archaeology of the time. As time passed, the term Albion appears to have been dropped by the Greeks for the term Britannia, a name first mentioned by Pythias, and it's now a name that's stuck. But it's more than just a name, as trade routes exist from Britannia to the larger classical world. Tin is found making its way across Gaul and into the Mediterranean, paid for with Macedonian coins that were becoming the standard in Gaul. By the 2nd century BC, society is evolving. You had Iron Age hill forts cropping up all over the place. Settlements were becoming more centralised. Farming had a surplus controlled by an evolved tribal elite, people who liked to show off their wealth. They had considerable military might. Burial mounds start to show the custom of being interred alongside chariots. These were not the fancy chariots that raced around the hippodromes of the Mediterranean. No, these were practical weapons platforms designed to deploy warriors into the thick of fighting, giving us an insight into these enigmatic elite warriors who rode into battle atop war machines. The coinage is also evolving. The style of the old Macedonian coins from Pythias' area are being copied. Abstract copies used to establish tribal links in a world with ever-increasing links to the Mediterranean. By the 1st century BC, there are regional differences in the coins of southern Britain, though I will add, you're not seeing much of this in the north of Britain. These coins do appear beyond the Humber, just not very often. This is very much a southern trend. And around 100 BC, something else seems to be occurring. The old Iron Age hill forts appear to be in decline, and in many cases abandoned, the tribes preferring smaller enclosures, and people migrating to previously unsettled areas. And in the south of England, people also seem to have been shifting from the classic old roundhouses into rectangular ones. It is unknown why these changes are occurring, but an evolution in coinage and wealth and power could explain some of this. Adding to this, the Roman Empire is currently assimilating nearby Hispania and Gaul, acquiring trade routes, as well as contacts as they went. Trade routes where the Britons gave natural resources in return for the luxuries of the Roman Empire. They gave resources like tin, gold, cattle, and many others. The main route started in modern-day Brittany, heading all the way up to Dorset. We're seeing Roman amphora in Britain, distinctive terracotta containers from the Mediterranean used to store goods such as fine wines. For the tribal leaders in the south, these were glorious times indeed. So all of a sudden you're getting images of Britons eating olives, wearing jewellery as far away as Persia, and drinking wines from Pompeii. This is a far cry from the Hollywood depictions of primitive woad wearers in an age of dirt. All this is paving the way for integration with Rome. All they're missing is a toga. On the flip side of this, imagine the Roman family living in Neapolis, feasting on British beef, wearing a gold-woven bracelet made in Dorset. So even though the official Roman records won't give us insight until the mid-1st century BC, they are no stranger to the Celts of southern Britain. It certainly explains some of these cultural developments. Though, most of the trade was between Britain and Gaul rather than the empire itself, and it was the Gauls that traded with Rome. Still, these goods found their way around. Because the Britons were rich, no doubt about it, as even when levies are placed on Gallic goods, the Britons simply paid the extra cost. Then, in 57 BC, the legendary Julius Caesar is at war with Gaul, changing everything, pushing across the Rhine in a punitive campaign and into Germania Magna. During this, in 55 BC, Julius Caesar, as we know him Julius Caesar, casts his eyes on Britain. Firstly, I'll clear up one myth. Because he has no intention on conquest, he is focused on Gaul. This is nothing more than an attempt to further his career, as taking the Roman legions to the most furthest point on the map will look good on his CV. His justification was that the Britons were aiding the Gauls against Rome. They'd even allowed the Bellovaci tribe to cross the channel, providing them with safe haven. So soon, Julius Caesar arrives at Britannia at the head of an army. But that is another story. Thank you for watching.